Hi everyone, my name is Jolyon and I'm an assistant professor of religious studies at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm making this short video to introduce you to my forthcoming book, Faking Liberties, Religious Freedom in American-Occupied Japan. Now, this book looks primarily at the American-led Allied occupation of Japan, which took place from the fall of 1945 until the spring of 1952. My concern is with a particular narrative that developed during the occupation and that has dominated historiography since. Simply put, that narrative was that before the Americans had arrived in Japan, Japan was utterly bereft of religious freedom. Basically, the occupiers' story was that although Japan had included a constitutional guarantee of religious freedom in Article 28 of the MEIJI Constitution, which went into effect in 1890, that article only paid lip service to the idea of religious freedom, and religious freedom didn't really exist in Japan until the occupiers arrived. Now, when I started looking at the primary sources, I found this to be a really strange and, in fact, utterly false account of religious freedom in modern Japan. In fact, when I started digging into the primary sources from what I call the Meiji constitutional period, I discovered that there are all kinds of actors who are talking in all sorts of ways about religious freedom, how to define religion, what the scope of freedom is, and how to make sure that the proper definitions remain in place. So one thing that we can see is that if religious freedom is understood to be a state of discourse where people are trying to talk about it and make it, then under the Meiji Constitution we certainly have religious freedom. Now, the other part of my story is about the occupation itself. The occupiers generally spoke quite confidently about how they had religious freedom and the Japanese didn't, but this bravado masked a lot of disagreement among the occupiers themselves about the nature of religion and the nature of religious freedom. So part of my job in the second half of the book is to unpack those debates among the occupiers, and also because I'm a scholar of religion, I spend quite a bit of time looking at the roles played by scholars of religion as expert advisors to the occupation bureaucrats. One of the things that emerges out of this is that although the occupiers were fond of saying that they were introducing the principle of religious freedom to Japan, in fact, it was during the occupation that the notion of religious freedom as this abstract universal principle was invented and reinforced and solidified. So what does that look like? Well, on the one hand, during the occupation, we have the development of the notion of religious freedom as a human right. This is not to say that concepts of human rights or of religious freedom hadn't existed before, but I argue in the book that it's the particular transnational circumstances of the occupation that force the concept of religious freedom as human right into existence. Another thing that I also talk about in the book is the legacies of the occupation for Japan and the world today. So to offer just one brief example of one of the things that I discuss, the occupiers and some leaders of religious movements and scholars of religion collaborated in protecting religious freedom in its new sense by trying to protect marginal movements from persecution. One of the terms that they invented to do this was the word new religions, Shinshūkyō. Now, that performed really important political work during the years of the occupation, but the point that I want to make here is that once that word came into existence in Japanese as Shinshūkyō, it was subsequently translated into English by people who had worked in the occupation and exported from Japan to the American Religious Studies Academy, where eventually it was picked up as a replacement for existing terminology like sects and cults. So we can see in that particular example how the promotion and protection of religious freedom during the Allied occupation of Japan not only changed Japan, but also ultimately changed the world. If you want to find out more, you can check out the book. It comes out from University of Chicago Press in April 2019. I'm very excited about it. There's a lot more in it than I can explain in 5 short minutes, but I do hope that you'll have a look. All right, thanks for listening.